So let's hold the applause. Once we get into the debate portion, let us hold the applause till the end of the debate. We will allow for applause after the opening statements and the closing statements. The audience is not allowed to take photographs using a flash. There shall be no booing or verbal outbursts from the audience. So once again, please be respectful so that we can have a good debate here tonight. So in order of people on the stage, I hope everybody backstage is ready here. We're going to bring them out in order as they were drawn. So Miss Edwards will be here. Mrs. Edwards will be here. Mrs. Isom in the center, and Mr. Lee on the far side. Questions. The rest of the questions, they have all been curated by myself and members of my leadership team and of our rules committee, which created the rules for this debate. So with that, I just want to make some opening statements of my own. Many question the reason behind the party's pushback against the debate. This is a partisan thing. We are Republicans, and we want to make sure that we give our candidates the best opportunity that they have to showcase themselves before election, and we feel that that should be done in the way that the Republican Party nominates our own candidates. So we thank all of these candidates once again for giving us their faith and giving us their trust to be able to put on a free and fair debate. So let's jump right into it. So for question number one, so Ms. Edwards, you will answer this one first. We will then rotate order. Mrs. Isom will be next. Oh, yes, opening statements first. That's on the list. So we'll go with opening statements, then we'll go to the first question. So we'll start first, I gotta look at my list, with Mr. Lee, then to Mrs. Isom, and then Becky Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you to the Utah Republican Party and to the City of Draper for hosting this event. Thanks to all of you for being here. I also want to introduce my wife, Sharon, our daughter, Eliza, who's here with us, along with a whole lot of siblings and members of our immediate and extended family. Then again, I'm from Utah. My ancestors had a lot of kids, so I'm probably related to about half of you. The federal government has become too big and too expensive because it's doing too many things it wasn't intended to do. I've learned a thing or two about how to unravel it, and I'd love the chance to continue doing so in Washington. When my first ancestors who came to Utah arrived in this valley about 175 years ago, there wasn't much to look at. They came here searching for religious freedom. They found it here. They just wanted to live out their lives, enjoying the blessings and finding happiness in freedom. That's why I focus on the Constitution, because we're the party on the Constitution and of freedom, and I'd appreciate your vote.
Mrs. Isom.
At the cafe in Enterprise, 6-year-old Jakers licked the ketchup off his fries. His mom wants to raise him right. Mr. Lee refused to help small towns like Enterprise. When I was in Raspberry Days at the rodeo, I helped the Westons hang banners. They tell me they need drop relief. Mr. Lee voted against it. Woodland Hills evacuated when wildfires threatened. Mr. Lee fought the funds to fight those fires. And local officials, they tell me they don't bother meeting with them. They say, I don't need a lecture, I need a letter of support. You've stayed too long in Washington when you forget who sent you there. When you can't pass bills, when people refuse to work with you. I'm Allie Isom. I'm a Utah Reagan classic conservative. I'm a business and community leader, and I get things done because I fight for the right things.
States Senate because Congress is broken. Utahns are tired of leaders with no vision and no results. Utahns deserve and expect elected leaders representing this state who are more than focused on personal gain, cronyism, and DC politics. There is a better way. I served for 10 years in the Utah House of Representatives and over led out by finding common ground, building on common ground, and working for solutions that help families and businesses across this state thrive. I know how to win elections. I won 5 times in Davis County as a Republican. I unseated an incumbent who had lost his way and did not represent the people anymore. It's time to bring proactive, productive, and inclusive leadership to the United States Senate.
I'll probably forget something else. I want to thank the people who helped put this on tonight. Our timekeeper, Danielle Harding, here in the front row. Thank you. We've got AG and our technical guys who are here. Everybody knows who helped make this happen. So once again, thank you to all those so I don't forget because I'll probably do that. We'd also like to thank Craig Thorne, who led us in the Pledge of Allegiance, for providing the flags for our backdrop. That was good of him to bring those tonight, and it's a wonderful addition to our auditorium this evening. So with that, we are going to go to questions now, because I almost did that first. So, Mrs. Edwards, you will be leading us out, and then once again, we'll rotate through. You'll answer the first question first, Mrs. Isom will answer the second question first, and Mr. Lee, so on, and then we'll just keep cycling back through. So that's how that's going to go. So, for our first question, has to deal with our food supply. With nationwide baby formula shortage, worry of our nation's food security is rising. According to the Washington Post, as of late 2019, JBS and 3 other food companies control about 85% of the U.S. beef production. JBS and Tyson Foods control 40% of the poultry market, and JBS and 3 other companies control nearly 70% of the pork market. JBS is a Brazilian-owned company, and most others have a majority of foreign ownership. JBS alone has been slapped with numerous antitrust and market manipulation lawsuits. Question is, do you believe that our food supply is a national security risk? And as a member of the Senate, what would you propose to stop the predatory practice of foreign companies on the American food system?
Thank you so much. I know, like many of you, my heart has been broken over the plight of small infants across this nation who continue to be without the formula that their lives depend on. It's bigger than that, though, and as Chairman Jorgensen mentioned, food security is incredibly important in this nation. It's important here in Utah, and not just for the families that go back 4 generations here who grow our crops, our farmers and ranchers who actually provide the food that we depend on so much. The monopolies that were mentioned there, JBS and others who do have predatory practices, are squeezing out generational farmers and ranchers across this state who are literally the lifeblood of our state. We need to do everything we can to support agriculture and ranchers, especially at a time when we're in the middle of a once-in-a-century drought. As we look at water optimization opportunities for our farmers and ranchers, as well as the efforts that we as regular citizens can make, we can address the challenges that can help them actually continue to grow and thrive the very crops that we need. As we're looking at what it means to have national security, top of that list has to be food security. Because we do not want to find ourselves in a situation like we see with Ukraine and Russia right now, where those supplies are being cut off, and the people of Ukraine and the people of Western Europe are going to be feeling those effects for a long time. We cannot be held to the dictates of monopolistic tendencies and evil leaders around the world. We need to support our industries, support the way of life that has been so important across this state for generations, and we can do this together. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hold our applause if we can. Let's hold our applause till the end. So, Mrs. Isom, do you believe that our food supply is a national security risk? And as a member of the Senate, what would you propose to stop the predatory practice of foreign companies on the American food system?
When I began my campaign, I made a commitment to walk in every one of Utah's 252 cities and towns, and then URTA Incorporated. Now it's 253, and I've been in more than 120 of them. I spent time in Howell with a family farmer. He owns one of the last family farms standing. The farm is paid for, it's been in the family for 100 years. As we're driving out to fight a field fire, he tells me, you know, the Isoms have 3 agricultural experiences a day: breakfast, dinner, and supper. And we talked about the challenge they have of raising cattle and how Argentinian beef are undermining the market because we allow them into this country to be processed here and stamped made in the USA. That is wrong. It has to stop. We are undermining America's family farms, left and right. To the point where I talked to a turkey farmer who supplies a huge percentage of turkeys in this state, and he's got a second job because he can't make ends meet. It's not right when we're subsidizing in all the wrong places and putting incentives in the wrong places. You know what's driving up their expenses and their costs? The cost of fuel. Jacob, who I mentioned earlier, his mom happens to be an alfalfa farmer. She just had to raise the price of her alfalfa because she paid $6 a gallon for diesel in California. She could tell us dairy farmers that she's going to have to raise their prices. It's directly related to our energy situation. These two challenges go hand in hand. We've got to do more to address the challenges of fuel and the cost of doing business for American farms. There's more we can do, and it absolutely is a national security issue. I like to eat, don't you? So let's all pay attention to that. What can I do about it? Put the incentives in the right places, protect American farmers, undermine the monopolies, and cease the monopolistic practices. We have to bring back American agriculture to a healthy place in this country. You're talking to my people. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, do you believe that our food supply is a national security risk? And as a member of the Senate, what do you propose to stop the predatory practice of foreign companies on the American food system?
Yes, absolutely. The threat to our food supply is absolutely something that presents a threat to our national security. There's good news and bad news here. The good news is that we have no natural reason to see a food supply shortage in this country. We've got amazing farmland, we've got amazing farmers, we've got outstanding producers. We get plenty of rainfall in this country. Sometimes it leaves Utah behind for a while, but it gets back to us eventually. The problem is government. Government chokes out competition, allows for and even incentivizes excessive consolidation, thereby squelching competition. So why are we pushing so many of these incentives overseas? The incentive to produce beef overseas, the incentive to consolidate here. Because of our tax and regulatory structure, we're making it possible for people to make a living here. Take, for example, the recent formula, the baby formula supply chain stoppage. This was entirely the government's own creation. Part of it was based on import restrictions, quotas, and tariffs. Part of it was based on regulations that made it almost impossible to sell European products here because they're labeled differently. And part of it was an unintended error with the WIC program, in the fact that many WIC vouchers require you to buy a certain brand. You can't just buy any one that's available. That's why I introduced the Formula Act that would lift these burdens so that people could gain access to it. This is quickly becoming a bipartisan effort, and one that I expect to pass in the Senate very soon. Look, at the end of the day, we've got everything we need to have an adequate food supply in this country. We just need the federal government to stay active.
Let's hold our applause to the end. Okay, Mrs. Isom, you will answer this one first. Utah is the second fastest growing state in the nation. With growth comes added challenges: water, transportation, and energy, just to name a few. Much of Utah's water supply is subject to federal oversight and control. For example, in Sanpete County, where I'm from, cities and farmers own the right to water runoff, but because of 100-year-old judicial decrees, they are unable to store the water that belongs to them. This water then runs downstream and is unavailable for use, losing an estimated 2/3 of yearly runoff. Most of these decrees will require federal action to correct. It is estimated that for the foreseeable future that water will be the largest barrier to growth in Utah. What policy can you enact or support to ensure Utah communities and farmers will have sufficient water to meet their needs going forward?
The first thing we need to do is get everyone that has a stewardship here on the same page. Utah needs a comprehensive water plan that includes the federal level officials, so they're united on one front. We have to protect and defend the water we have, our water rights. Other states have lawyered up long before we were ready. Now we're finally at the table and we're making some efforts, but more can be done to defend Utah's water. We have to be ready, and we know that this is a critical issue. In every single community I walked in, with the exception of Bluffdale nearby, every community leader told me water was their #1 concern, directly tied to growth. We have to do more as communities. That means we might have to stop watering lawns with culinary water. We might have to start measuring and metering water so we actually have the numbers to make good policy decisions. We have to support the Great Salt Lake. Current official voted against the Great Salt Lake. No other senator in Utah history would have voted against preserving the Great Salt Lake. We can do more here. We have to do better. I met with Twilla County. They told me when they'd gone to our federal delegation for help, they'd been told they wouldn't receive any, from Senator Lee in particular. And I hope he's able to address that today, because they have water rights. They just need the infrastructure to get the water to them. And that's what we need to do, find the solutions that need to happen. We have Fillmore that has some prohibitions that are legal, barriers that can be moved. We have storage issues and infrastructure issues. It requires real leadership. It requires somebody willing to bring everyone to the table and have the bigger conversation. It requires us to do the right things and to do it now. And I'm committed to do that for the state of Utah. The last thing I want to make a point about, we have to do more. Every single one of us. This isn't just on our federal delegation. As Utahns, we can do more. In our businesses, in our workplaces, we're already doing it in our homes.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, if you would like to respond to that, we'll grant you 45 seconds and then you can answer the question.
Great. They run right together, I assume.
Yeah, run right together.
Great.
Yep.
As to your suggestion that I haven't done anything to help water storage infrastructure, I don't know who's advising on this, but you've got bad facts. As a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, this is something I've pushed for consistently. We live in a cold, dry, mountainous desert, and we have a lot of federal public land in our state. Those two things coupled together mean that we need water storage infrastructure projects very often being placed on federal land. That presents added challenges. You've got to get the federal government willing to pay for it, and you've also got to get through all the red tape, the NEPA process, the certifications that go along with that. And so that's why I've moved aggressively to have these things move forward. And like I say, I don't know who's advising on this, but you've gotten bad advice. As far as the fact that I voted against the Great Salt Lake, I didn't realize that was possible to vote against the Great Salt Lake. I have no idea what you're referring to there. With regard to the underlying question, to the extent we can identify areas where we need water storage infrastructure, we've got to push them. We've identified a number of those in our state. Things like the Lake Powell pipeline project are essential to the growth of many parts of the state. And we've got other projects like that in different parts of the state that desperately need water so that we can keep up with growth and supply the needs for residents, farmers, and ranchers alike. In order to do that, we'll have to have these projects. Sadly, it can take sometimes not just 5 or 10, 15 or 20 years in order to complete the process under NEPA. Now look, under the National Environmental Policy Act, you have to undertake an environmental review before undertaking one of these projects on federal land. It's taking way too long. There's no reason why to achieve the same environmental outcomes, this has to take a decade or two. That's good only for lawyers and a handful of lobbyists, and bad for everyone else. That's why I've introduced a series of reforms under the title of the Unshackle Act to expedite the NEPA process and to impose strict shot clock limits on how long it takes to bring these about. Look, we ought to be able to build these things in our natural lifetime and not have to wait until our great-grandchildren are born.
Thank you. Mrs. Edwards, what policy can you enact or support to ensure that Utah communities and farmers will have sufficient water to meet their needs going forward?
Thank you. I know that just like you, water is life. Water is literally the lifeblood of the state and of all the western states. We know a couple of things right off the bat. We need to invest in water infrastructure. I've been really pleased to see the common sense, bipartisan efforts around infrastructure that have helped the Beaver County hydroelectric plant up Beaver Canyon replace, hopefully they're anticipating this, replace their 80-year-old hydroelectric turbine in that plant. And the people in Daggett County looking for an opportunity to line their canals up there that will allow them to continue to water their crops clear till the end of August when it's harvest time. This infrastructure package that was passed in a bipartisan way was a tremendous help to counties and communities around our state. Second, water optimization projects are really going to be critical here. And for our communities to be able to take advantage of those grants that are available, federal grants, and especially farmers and ranchers that we've mentioned so many times already this evening. In addition to that, as someone here in Utah, as Utahns rather, that depend on the Colorado River for so much of our water, we need to be able to have conversations with our adjacent states who also depend on the Colorado River. The upper basin states and the lower basin states, what this means is we have to be able to have conversations with Democrats from other states, work to get things done in a bipartisan way to make sure that we access all of the resources we need and that the other states also have the resources that they deserve and need. And we need to make sure that we have someone who is able to do that. And in addition, making sure that we have an ability as federal officials to work with our local, state, and other efforts that are being done right now in really innovative ways in the state of Utah. I've been excited to see that, and I look forward to working on this on the federal level as well.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Lee, this one is for you first. So we're going to move on to public lands. Total land acreage in Utah is 52,696,960 acres. Of this total, the federal government owns 33,275,132 acres, or 63.1% of all Utah land is owned by the federal government. Much of this federal land is used for energy production, precious metal and mineral extraction, livestock grazing, and recreation. What policies should be enacted from the federal level to help lessen the price at the pump and ensure energy independence and a strong economy in the Mountain West and in Utah?
Yeah. Great question. Thanks for asking it. Yeah, you're right. Most of our land in Utah is owned by the federal government. The number's even higher than that. You throw in all the land that's under the control of the federal government. It's upwards of 67%. What that means is that it's harder for us to fund everything in Utah, from our school systems to police services, to search and rescue, fire stations, everything gets harder to fund as a result of that. And as you allude to, it also makes it harder for us to produce energy that we desperately need, because we've got a whole lot of energy found on our federal public lands. Some of the best oil and gas reserves in the country are found right here in Utah, and especially with what's happening elsewhere in the world, with the President of the United States, Joe Biden, going to foreign leaders, cap in hand, going to OPEC, Saudi Arabia. We've been looking toward countries controlled by despotic dictators like Venezuela. Well, we've got these resources right here at home. It's a disgrace. So the first thing I think we need to do with regard to federal public lands, we need to pass legislation that I've introduced called the More Pill Act. The More Pill Act would require the federal government to pay an actual tax equivalent to what the government would have to pay in property taxes were it not a non-government owner of that land. The reason for that is our communities have been starved for cash for too long. They're not able to get by. They're responsible for maintaining services for that land, but they can't tax it. That's not fair. It would also help incentivize an equalization of federal land ownership. When you look at federal land across the country, in every state east of the Mississippi, the federal government owns less than 15% of the land. Usually it's in the low single digits. In every state to the west of Colorado, it's more than 15%. In our state, it's 2/3. That is wrong. We'd be wealthier, we'd be more prosperous, we would be more free and more able to fill up a tank of gas in our car without going broke if we did that one thing.
Thank you. Mrs. Edwards, what policy should be enacted from the federal level to help lessen the price of the pump and support energy independence and a strong economy in the Mountain West and in Utah?
Thank you. This question actually brings up two incredibly important issues. Number one, public land. How did we get here? And the second thing is energy independence and why that should matter to us. Let me address first public lands. We have some of the most beautiful, amazing, pristine land here in our state. It's a gift to the United States, a gift to the people of Utah. But here's what has happened is because Congress is so ineffective, it's left a leadership vacuum that the executive branch has stepped right into over and over and has continued to have this ping-pong approach with designation and then pulling it back and then redesignating public lands to the tune of hundreds of millions of acres. It's leaving communities across this state behind. They're uncertain about their future, and it's wrong. It's the wrong way to address public lands. There is a way for us to address conservation of these beautiful lands and make sure that we have access for sportsmen, hunters, and fishers, people who have been involved in these activities with their families for generations. You know, I think about the people that I know who go to the elk hunt every year, to elk camp, and how important that is to their way of life. We need to make sure that those people continue to have access of those lands. Now, specifically, what can we do? We can look at an exception to the Antiquities Act, like what happened in Wyoming. That would allow us to preserve more of our lands and conserve those for use here in our state. Second thing we can do is we can require an approval of our federal delegation before any additional lands are designated as public lands. Let me talk for a minute about energy independence and why that matters. It's an incredibly important part of our national security, and we have some of the cleanest, most efficient product on the natural gas and oil avenue into basin that we've seen. In addition to supporting that, we need to have strategic investments around renewables like we see in Beaver County and other places in this state.
Thank you. Mrs. Isom, what policy should be enacted from the federal level to help lessen the price of the pump and support energy independence and a strong economy in the Mountain West and in Utah?
I don't know about you, but I am sick and tired of career politicians who will say anything to get reelected. I am sick and tired of career politicians who will sponsor bills with catchy titles that make for great cable TV, but never get them across the finish line. What I want to see here is action. What you won't see from me, I wouldn't have voted against health reauthorization. I would not vote against rural Utah. I would not vote against the Great America Outdoors Act. I would not vote against the Emory County Lands Bill, a crucial bill for rural Utah that brought many partners together and addressed the public lands issue. I would not vote against the Nautical Water Settlement Agreement. These issues are crucial to rural Utah, crucial for public lands. Energy is really a matter of supply and demand, and we have to allow for the market to solve it, to resolve it, and government must be incredibly careful about adjusting the dials too far. So often, when government turns the dials too far, does it the wrong way, and we pay the price, like the third round of stimulus money. When it comes to energy, the administration right now is using rural Utah as pawns in this game, this scheme. The far right and the far left keep arguing over what's right. They're using the American taxpayer and the American consumer for their own entertainment and purposes of the entertainment that we see in politics these days. It's pure theater. And I'm tired of theater. I know over Memorial Day we all paid way too much for gas. Nearly $5 a gallon is obscene. But we're being played here. Bureaucracy needs term limits as well, because we've got to expedite the permitting of the development right now in natural gas and oil. This country has oil reserves, and we should not just be energy independent. This country should be a global energy leader.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, on to number 5. Well, it's actually not number 5, but, so, now we are back to Mrs. Edwards again. The Biden administration, once again, this question is about public lands. The Biden administration has spoken highly of the plan they refer to as the 30 by 30 initiative, which is that 30% of the United States land and waters will be placed in conservation by 2030. While nearly 2/3 of the state is owned by the federal government, this would destroy the Utah economy and further increase our dependence on foreign countries for food and energy. How do you plan on protecting the state's energy development, precious metals, mineral extraction, livestock grazing, and recreation from the predation of the federal government?
This is great because I get a chance to finish up on the last part of my answer from the previous question that I was trying to rush in there on. We do know that energy independence is incredibly important. And the plan that was referenced there, the 30 by 30, is really problematic because it addresses our changing climate and our environmental stewardship and our energy needs in all the wrong ways. It comes at it from overregulation and the exact opposite of what we see when Republicans have a voice on these issues. I know this because for 10 years I led out on clean air and climate here in the Utah House of Representatives. I did this in a way that supported market-based approaches and brought people together, and in fact I ended up passing and sponsoring and passing the very first piece of legislation anywhere in a Republican state, anywhere in the country, that acknowledged climate change, the importance of our energy independence, the importance of having and growing a diverse energy portfolio here in our state. These are incredibly important issues, and we need to address them with market-based solutions, not highly over-regulated issues that we sometimes see from the other side. These are things that, as much as anything else, are exemplifying the fact that Congress is not doing their job. We're in this position because we have ineffective leadership, even on the Republican side, when we should be standing out for free market solutions. And things like, it was mentioned on the PILT update, but in addition to that, we need to be in a position where we are supporting Sittler land exchanges and transfers so that we have the opportunity to extract minerals and resources when we can, where we can, and in an environmental, sustainable way that is productive and proactive and something that we can feel good about from an environmental standpoint as well.
Thank you. Ms. Isom, how do you plan on protecting the state's energy development, precious metal, mineral extraction, livestock grazing, and recreation from the predation of the federal government?
The first thing I want to do is put term limits in place for bureaucrats. I'm for term limits for elected officials. I've made that pledge myself to serve 2 terms and come home. And I think the same standard applies to those in federal agencies, because they become resistant to the bigger picture, and they become creatures of the system they created. It's time to end that. The other thing I think is important is we need to realize the incentives need to be in the right places. So many of the incentives are in the wrong places, where people hold on to power and undermine solutions. Supporting SITLA is a great place to start. It is a good solution in terms of the state, and I want to call out and salute our efforts on that front in the state of Utah. We have tremendous leadership there. But where we're failing, I've sat in county commissioner's office after county commissioner's office, and I've heard tale after tale of how they feel abandoned and alone in this battle, that they need a voice in Washington, D.C. that speaks for them. And this is why I'm calling for a new kind of leadership. A kind of leadership that's based on principles and that really listens. Because the locals who tell me they don't see enough of either of our senators on occasion, they want to see more of them. They want to see more of them. They want to see action. They want to see collaboration. They want an opportunity to talk, to find answers. And those folks deserve a partnership. They're the ones on the front line. And they're afraid to come forward and say too much. And I'm not going to use names out of respect for their confidences, but it's enormously disappointing to me when they're looking for answers, they're looking for support, and they're not getting it. The last thing I want to say is there's an opportunity here with the Conservative Climate Caucus. The House has modeled a great solution. I'd like to see the Senate pursue the same thing, and not just for the sake of appearances and cable TV, but to get things done.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, How do you plan on protecting the state's energy development, precious metal and mineral extraction, livestock raising, and recreation from the predation of the federal government?
You mentioned the 30 by 30 plan a minute ago. When I first heard about that, I had all sorts of questions. 30% of what by 2030? If you want 30% of our land in some sort of protected, environmentally protected status by then, it's important to remember that essentially all federal land is already in a degree of environmentally protected status. Therefore, by one measure, 30 by 30 might be a bargain for Utah if they actually meant this. Meaning, if we only had to have 30% of our land instead of 67% of our land under the control of the federal government, yeah, we'd be much more able to produce energy, to mine, to farm, to ranch, and do everything else that we need to do. We have to remember that wealth isn't just created. Government can't create it. It doesn't come just out of the ether. All wealth has to ultimately either be mined out of the earth, grown out of the soil, or manufactured. Government can't do any of those things. It can just take away from other activities to do those things and reallocate those resources. So we have to be very careful when using the blunt force instrument of government to claim to be able to do this. So in that respect, the 30 by 30 plan, and I know that their plan is to put it in some sort of wilderness designation where you can't do anything on the land except walk onto it as if it were a sand trap with a rake and walk off with it with a rake. And you can't do anything in the process. This will make us poorer. When you go to the pump and you're seeing that you're paying almost $5 a gallon, think about the fact that, Joe Biden did that to us. He did that through bad energy policy. When you go to the grocery store and you're paying excessive prices for everything from bread to milk to eggs, Joe Biden did this through excessive spending and excessive government regulation. When we go and pursue these radical leftist policies, these are things that impoverish real, hard-working Utahns, and I won't have it.
Okay, next question. We'll start with Mrs. Isom. In a Deseret News Hinckley Institute poll in 2001, 41% of Utah voters thought there was widespread voter fraud. There have been much discussion about election integrity and electoral challenges, including private text messages between Mr. Lee and Mark Meadows. We saw many similar questions arising: Bush versus Gore, Bush versus Kerry, Trump versus Clinton, in addition to Trump versus Biden. Assuring free and fair elections is key to the survival of our republic. If there is a question, this is where the question begins. If there is a question about election integrity, what is the proper way to challenge electoral results, and how can we restore confidence in our election?
I really welcome the opportunity to address this question because as I've met with Utahns statewide, across the political spectrum, so many of us feel unseen, unheard, and undervalued, and we care about our country deeply. We want to make sure our voices are heard, that our votes matter. And the notion that the playing field would be uneven or that somebody would have a different system or set of rules isn't right. We all believe in fairness and equality. Everyone wants a secure, free, and fair election. The reality is elections are overseen at the state level. And I don't know about you, but I do not want the federal government taking over the election system. But we have to make sure it's secure. Every state has the onus upon itself to validate its election processes, to make sure they're secure, especially from cyber hacking. Many of us think the front in Ukraine is on the ground, but let's not forget there's a front right now, right here on the web. And we have to be paying attention to its threat to our democracy as well. So I want reassurance. How do we make sure from a federal level? We ask for evidence, we ask for data. I want hard data. And it's not inappropriate for the federal government to ask for an audit every single election. That's how we find out where systems break down. That's how we ensure good outcomes. The voice of the American people matters. Every person in this nation deserves to be heard, no matter what their opinion is, no matter what their political persuasion is. And this is one of those instances where I think states do a pretty good job of managing the system, but we have not held them accountable. So let's hold them accountable.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, If there is any question about election integrity, what is the proper way to challenge electoral results, and how can we restore confidence in our election?
I completely agree. Elections are to be handled by the states, administered by state officials. When we look at voter fraud and allegations there, we have to remember that in any election, any significant election, you have to assume there's some potential for fraud, or at least attempted fraud. The best we can do is to have states that will innovate within their own sphere and enact legislation that they'll renew, ideally every couple of years, to stay a step or two ahead of where potential fraud should be. I would love to see it if more states would move toward making people produce a voter ID, an ID before they vote. Got to do that before we get on a plane. We also very much need to come to terms with how we handle mail-in balloting. Mail-in balloting was different in 2020 than it ever had been anywhere. Unlike Utah, a lot of states have never had much experience with it. Other states have had some experience, but loosened their signature verification and their fraud detection and prevention efforts. And that's why there were real concerns about this. You brought up the 2020 election and the text messages. I want to explain what Congress's role is in a presidential election. It's limited, it's narrow. The states appoint electors. Those electors cast electoral votes. Those electoral votes determine the outcome of the presidential election. Congress has only one job, and it's to receive those votes, open the envelopes in which they're submitted, and count them. Open and count. That's the whole game. So there were rumors following the 2020 presidential election, even following the moment when the electors met and submitted their electoral votes, that there were multiple states thinking about correcting alleged errors in their own state's electoral count. It was causing them to consider withdrawing their electoral votes and submitting new ones. I made calls to investigate the accuracy of these claims. The claims were false. On that basis, I voted to certify the election.
Thank you, Mrs. Edwards.
Thank you.
Do you want me to reread the question, or are you good? Okay.
Thanks. On Memorial Day, my husband and I had the opportunity to be at a Memorial Day event in Bluffdale at the city cemetery there, and we met the Bluffdale city royalty. These were 5 young women who were so excited about one thing. You know what that was? Voting. The only girl who was still 17 was turning 18 actually on election day in November, and she could not have been more excited about that she was going to be able to vote and cast her voice in the process that is one of the foundational institutions here in our country, safe and secure elections. What we know, some foundational things, is we want to make sure that we have safe and secure elections that are also open and available for every eligible legal voter, and that we have transparency and accountability in that process. I think when we saw in the 2020 election, our former president cast doubt on a system that is so foundational to our country, a full 18 months before the election even began, and started to cast that doubt, and people plant the seeds of doubt and continue that up until the election and for months afterwards. That was deeply concerning to me. And in addition, I was very, very concerned when I saw the hyper-partisanship that was perpetrated for personal gain by some who engaged in activities that we still have questions about today, about timeline and activities and intent. This should not have been answered us 2 solid years later. We deserve better. We deserve more accountability and transparency in our process, of which we do it better than anywhere else in the nation here in Utah, with internal audits and external audits. But we need to make sure that we have constant eyes on this, on our local elections and our federal elections as well.
Thank you. Okay. Miss Kate. Now I've lost my train of thought. Did everybody go on this question? I just want to make sure. Has everybody got a chance to? Okay. Make sure I was right. Okay. On to the next one. Finance. In a recent article written in Tech Startup, since January of 2020, the U.S. has printed nearly 80% of all U.S. dollars in existence. At the start of 2020, there was a $4.01 trillion in circulation. January 4th, 2021, that number had increased to $6.7 trillion. By October of 2021, that number climbed to $20.08 trillion in circulation. This has led to 41-year high and an inflation rate of 8.5%. How do we begin to curb inflation, and what can be done as a senator to slow the printing of money that we do not have? Mr. Reed.
Inflation isn't just an academic concern. It affects every one of us every day. I see families across Utah struggling to make ends meet, realizing that they just go to the store and buy a dozen eggs, a gallon of milk, a couple loaves of bread, and be into this $20 before they know it. And they feel it again when they go to the gas pump. They feel it in everything they do. In fact, we've measured this. I have my team gather data. We've estimated that the average Utah family is having to spend on their monthly household expenses an additional $751 a month, every month, as compared to the beginning of last year. Now this is recurring. This comes back every month. 30 days is a short period of time, and it reemerges every time, demanding to be paid. Who do you have to thank for this? The federal government. The same government that chose to print all that money. The same government that chose to inflate our currency by printing that money. That is what happens. You know, inflation is defined as what happens when we have too many dollars chasing too few goods. It's the natural, foreseeable, predictable, understood result of just printing money. We live in an era in which Congress doesn't operate under a balanced budget and has resisted efforts to pass a balanced budget amendment, and thus far hasn't passed my balanced budget amendment, which is the leading Republican proposal that would fix the problem. Congress just spends as if it were free, as if it were drawing from a limitless well that had no impact. But inflation is real, and we are its victims, every one of us. So how do we stop it? We need more people willing, boldly, courageously, to get elected to represent Utah and Washington, and just say no.
Ms. Edwards, how do we begin to curb inflation, and what can be done as a senator to slow the printing of money that we simply do not?
I couldn't agree more that the problem lies with the federal government. Let's make sure we're clear on who the federal government is. It's Congress. They're not doing their job. It's not okay.
Please,
Congress to continue to kick the can down the road. I know it's hard to balance a budget, and you do too on a personal level. I'm talking about as an elected official though. I actually did that 10 times when I served in the Utah House. I know it's hard. In the United States Senate and Congress, we have not passed a balanced budget since 1998. Some of you in this room have never lived in an America without trillions of dollars of national debt. That is impacting our ability, how we live, how we spend our money, and it can be better. So let's not just attack the federal government as though we have no control over that. We do. And when we talk about a balanced budget amendment, I appreciate that. And I know that for many people has been a focus of theirs for, let's say, 12 years, for example. And yet, we sit here still with ineffective leadership on that issue. That puts us in a place right now where we are no better off than we were 12 years ago when we talk about the federal deficit and the budget. So we want to make sure Congress has to take this seriously to curb spending. And like I say, I know it's hard, it requires fiscal discipline, but of all the duties of Congress, the power of the purse is uniquely theirs. When they do not do that job, they are not working for us. We need people who are willing to work for us day in, day out, build coalitions, work together, and do the hard work on behalf of the people of this country.
Mr. Lee, would you like 45 seconds to respond to that? Would you like 45 seconds to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you. Let's be.
Well, 12 years comment was pretty direct.
Look, let's be clear about something. Many members of Congress view it as their job, view it as Congress's job, to pass more spending bills. The more the better, the more lucrative the better. One of the ways they do this is they attach very popular features, features that no member of Congress wants to be seen as voting against, lest they be deemed as demonic, unsympathetic people. And so they attach them as if on a Christmas tree, one ornament right after the other. And by doing that, they incentivize a lot of people to vote for them. And it's a bad process. It's one that leads us to being $31 trillion in debt. That's how we got there. So yeah, we do need more members of Congress who, in addition to proposing and passing balanced budget amendments, will also vote against spending that's excessive.
Thank you. Mrs. Isom, how do we begin to curb inflation, and what can be done as a senator to slow the printing of money we simply do not have?
This nation has unfortunately and tragically squandered the prosperity that we enjoyed for the last 12 years. We have some really tough calls to make right now. And I believe the process could have been changed if it were the problem in the past 12 years. There are many things that could be done, but the bottom line is, this is Congress's job, and they should not get one more paycheck until they get the job done, until we get a balanced budget. It's one thing to talk about a balanced budget amendment, and it's a whole other thing to get it passed. It's time to renew the energy behind that, and it is time for bold and courageous leadership. Leadership that believes in Republican principles of limited government, of low taxes, of reining in spending, of putting control closest to the people, because that's where it governs best. And realizing government cannot be the solution to all our problems. The monetary policy of printing money is ridiculous. We've all played Monopoly, it's silly, right? We don't do that in our own households. I grew up in hard scrabble times from a family that worked hard, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. And we had to make a budget. When I was a newlywed in Provo, Utah in 1989, our rent was $200 a month, and we had $800 a month to live on. We made a budget. We figured out how to make ends meet. I wish $800 went as far today as it did then. But I worry for my kids, and I worry for my grandkids, and what kind of future they have. I want to see them prosper. I want the American dream to be real for them. And we have some tough decisions to make as a nation right now. It's time for adults. It's time for Congress to do its job. I'd like it all. Take a look at Rick Scott's plan. I really like a lot of the things I see from him. Not paying government until they do their job, and then capping the ceiling unless we're at war. I think there are a lot of really great ideas there.
Thank you. Mrs. Edwards, this question is for you to lead off on. Utah is leading the nation in the fight against ESG, or environmental social governance scores. These are a form of credit rating which companies and governments can judge your state or your business based on 3 terms: environmental, social, and governance. Environmental: if a company thinks that you're using too much water, too much fuel, or simply does not believe your business is good for the environment, it can affect your score. Social: if they do not believe that your workplace employees are diverse enough, it can affect your score. If they do not like the political cause or candidates that you donate to, this can also affect your score. Not only does this affect your score, but it can affect your company or state's ability to borrow money, get permits, qualify for a credit card, or even buy a home. As CEO of BlackRock said, we are forcing behaviors. What can you do as a senator to help continue to lead the way in the fight against ESG scores? And would you support legislation banning the use of ESG scores in the U.S.?
Thank you. ESG, as was just described, is something that has been around since the early 70s. Why just now are we starting to hear about this more frequently? Well, it's because the overreach of this issue is being seen in China. It's being seen in countries like that where individuals actually have social credit scores. This is impacting them. We see companies across the nation, and most importantly, we also see states being impacted. I'm going to speak from what I've heard from our top state official in this arena. This is our state treasurer, Oaks, who spoke across county conventions. I heard him speak so many times. We went around the state with county conventions and the state convention as well, talking about the real challenges he's concerned about for our state, what this means for us as we may be impacted What does our bonding look like? Our ability to borrow money, our ability to be hold tight on our AAA rating, which has been so important, and we have earned that as a state by having fiscally conservative policies. When that's up against a conflict with access on this environmental, social governance, we have a potential problem. And especially when we see the government starting to encroach and impact this issue as well, government inserting itself in the free market, very concerning. So while I am deeply supportive of some of these issues, as some of you may be as well, is this the right way? Is this a blunt instrument, as has been mentioned? Is this the best way for us to address this? I think not. We can do better, we can have these conversations, and we can, when we see on ESG scores where we have a company, an oil and gas company in China, have a better score than our own companies in the United States, that's where we have a problem. We cannot let market forces be impacted by government and by outside groups perpetrating these kinds of social agendas. It's not the right place to have those conversations.
Thank you. Mrs. Isom, what can you do as a senator to help continue to lead the way in the fight against ESG scores? Would you support legislation banning the use of ESG scores in the U.S.?
As a business executive, I understand the need to have standards. I understand the value of social good. I understand the need to promote the wellness and well-being of our world and the well-being of its people. I understand all of that. But a great idea has just gone a little too far. And when we overstep and it starts to impact state governments, local governments, and individuals, a good idea has gone bad. And at this time, I think it's important that we validate and value the role of business in this country. I think too often we've given the wrong people way too much power, and we've allowed big companies to be too powerful, too influential, and to control our identity and our privacy way too much. But when I see ESG, like Becky, I start thinking about Marlo Oak's speech to every single county. I too could give that 1-minute spiel on BlackRock, and I have heard it time and time again. And thanks to Treasurer Oaks, I went home and checked my retirement plans to see who's in charge of it and what their standards are. Because I've been in business, I believe in being hands-off as much as possible and not intruding on business models. But I also think we've got to draw a heavy and defined line and fight like lions to make sure this does not happen. We must support reshoring manufacturing, and we must support American companies. But we also must defend the bonding ability of our local governments to do their job and serve Utah and the American people as well.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, what can you do as a senator to help continue to lead the way to fight against ESG scores? And would you support legislation banning the use of ESG scores in the U.S.?
Thank you. We're all in unanimous agreement of the fact that State Treasurer Marlo Oakes has done amazing work in this area. Has educated people from one end of the state to the other and across the country. Look, I don't know if I'd say it was ever a great idea. I mean, it started out as a horrible idea. It's gotten horribly horrible since then. I mean, look, it's one thing if they want to get together and give each other awards to talk about who is best on the environment, or who is the most socially woke, or who has the best governance strategies appealing to the leftist mob out there. They can do that if they want to, but there are a couple of things that would otherwise stop it. The first is, and Mrs. Isom referred to this, I love the fact that you went home and checked your retirement account, because that's very often how these things are brought under control, is that individual customers, consumers, and shareholders will hold them accountable. So the first big thing is shareholders' actions. There's director liability in the part of a corporation if the corporation isn't serving the shareholders well, if they're not running the company the way that it should be run. The other potential pitfall that they can face is antitrust liability, insofar as you've got businesses colluding, one with another, setting up cartels in order to enforce their woke agenda through the ESG standards. That's a problem too. This is where they want to get around it. What they're trying to do now is to force the government, principally through the Securities and Exchange Commission and through some other federal regulators, but especially the SEC, They want them to mandate ESG reporting. That takes care of their shareholders' actions and director liability, and it probably also blocks some of the threat they face under antitrust. That's what we can't afford to have happen. That's why I'm supportive of legislation. It would make sure that our federal regulators never, ever get the power to enforce ESG.
Thank you. So, Ms. Lice, you'll lead us off on this one. We are a nation of immigrants. Many sectors of agriculture, food production, and construction are relying on migrant workforces to keep the country fed and a roof over their head. We want those coming to our country to immigrate legally. It has been said that there have been immigrants waiting in line for green cards since 2007, with dreams of being able to become a green card holder and then an American citizen fading for many migrants. What can you do as a member of the Senate to help streamline and expedite the legal immigration policy in this country?
This question feels a little personal because right now, Alley for Utah Isom campaign headquarters smells like borscht. We're running the campaign out of my home, and we have a dear family, and they're our family, from Ukraine living with us as they pursue asylum. And never has the immigration system been front and center in my life until now. And it is a mess. It's a hot mess. And it takes too long, months between hearings. The first thing we have to do is secure the border. We are not a safe nation unless we have secure borders. And the money needs to be spent to put physical obstacles in place, to put surveillance in place, and to sufficiently man the border, or woman border. Number two, we need to bring people out of the shadows. We need to make it possible for them to be here, to work legally, to work fairly, and to pay into the system. They should be paying taxes and paying their fair share. Number three, we need to have an expedited road to citizenship for those who've been here. There needs to be a clear way. This process is enormously complicated. You can't even link family applications together. You have to fill out the same bulk of paperwork over and over and over again. And we speak the language and have degrees, and it's complicated for us. So I'm telling you, I want to get the folks from Chick-fil-A to tackle the immigration problem. Maybe we can figure out how to get things through a little faster. The last thing, we've got to start having a concrete conversation about the bureaucracy that handles immigration. We've got to have a conversation about process improvement. We've got to have a hard conversation about who's actually in charge of this, because both sides are politicizing this for gain. And in the meantime, there's a hot mess at the border. We thought it was bad in the last administration. It's horrid now. Let's do something now.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, the dream of becoming a green card holder and then an American citizen fading for many migrants, what can you do as a member of the Senate to help streamline and expedite the legal immigration policy in this country?
We're a nation of immigrants. We always have been. I hope we always will be. Nearly all of us are either immigrants ourselves or the descendants of people who immigrated to this country. We've got to make sure that in order to be the country that welcomes immigrants for future generations to come, that they come through the front door and not the back door. We've made the front door very difficult in countless circumstances like the one you described. We've made legal immigration taxing. It's even worse with regard to some. If you're looking for an employment-based immigrant visa and you come from certain heavily populated countries, let's say India, for example, you'll be on a waiting list, not just since 2007, you'll be on a waiting list for between 75 and 90 years. In other words, you'll never get it. It's because of a racist artifact in our immigration code that's never been weeded out. Been working for a decade to get rid of it. It's been sweat, blood, and tears as part of a bipartisan effort. Took all sorts of arrows from the left and the right on that, and finally got it passed through the Senate, last Congress, and then the Democrat-controlled House blocked it at the end of the day. It's just one example of how our legal immigration system is broken. What's doubly unfair is when we make it nearly impossible for people to immigrate legally, and then we have an administration led by President Biden who essentially says, let's throw the gates open, let's have open borders, come on in. We'll let you claim asylum, and you won't really have to answer any questions. You'll be told at the border, come back, and we call you for an immigration hearing that may take a very long time to get there. Look, we can bring about meaningful reform, but it gets harder and harder to bring about these reforms, and I know because I've tried. Every time we have an open borders president, it gets tougher. So if we want to fix our legal immigration system, we've got to make sure that our border is secure. President Biden has made that impossible. It's hurting the poorest of the poor and America's middle class in the process, and it has to end.
Thank you. Mrs. Edwards, with the dream of being able to become a green card holder and then an American citizen fading for many migrants, what can you do as a member of the Senate to help streamline and expedite the legal immigration policy in this country?
I appreciate the comments about the disastrous policies supported by President Biden, including the removal of Title 42. I understand the challenges that we see right now in Congress when this continues to be one of the most egregious examples of an ineffective Congress that continues to kick the can down the road year after year and decade after decade, leaving the people who are trying to get into this country legally at a very, very vulnerable place where they are being preyed upon. We have human trafficking like we have never seen before, and the rates of the challenges that people trying to come into this country legally are appalling. It's not okay, though, to continue to say that this is the problem of one party. I agree. President Biden's approach here is disastrous. When we pair that, though, with the ineffective and absent Republican leaders on this issue, we face exactly what we're facing right now. And the reality is that if we continue to elect the same people, we're going to be sitting here in 6 years and we will have the very same conversations. We'll be talking about disastrous Democratic proposals. We'll be talking about, yeah, let's have safe and secure borders. Let's maintain the human integrity of the people going through the process. And let's make sure that we have an expedited pathway for legal immigration. All of those are things I think all of us in this room could agree upon. The problem is not us. The problem is not the fact that we agree on this. The problem continues to be Congress that will not do its job. It's leaving the people of this country behind. It's leaving Utah's economy behind, because we do have job sectors and industries, entire industries, ag, tourism and hospitality and others that need help in this arena, and it is not okay to continue pointing fingers. Let's ask pointed questions and do the work.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Lee, you're going to lead us off on this one. In the month of March, there were 210,000 migrant arrests at the southern border. With once again record number of illegal border crossings being documented, drugs like fentanyl are continuing to pour into our country. If Republicans take back the House and Senate, do you support the funding and completion of the wall? Why or why not? And then with a follow-up question, what should a strong border policy look like in your view?
Yes. Emphatically, yes, I support the completion of the wall. I say that as someone who has spent 2 years living along the U.S. southern border with Mexico, where I lived, worked among, and served those, the poorest of the poor, recent immigrants, most of them, who lived along the border. You know, there's a narrative spun by the media. It's deceptive and dangerous. And that narrative is that anyone who is an immigrant necessarily wants open borders. I can tell you, no one is more adversely and immediately affected than a recent immigrant family living along our Mexican border by open borders immigration policy. Uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration most immediately threaten the jobs, the neighborhood security, the schools, and the children of these immigrants. And they're fearful of it. We do have to have control over it. And as far as what does that look like, yeah, we need a wall, but in addition to that, we also need a president. And I am going to assign blame here. Because, yeah, it's a political issue on both sides. But we do have one party, currently led by President Joe Biden, who has manipulated the law, has refused to enforce the law, and has modified the way that we approach our asylum procedures so as to create an invitation to just come on in. Now, this is very, very good for a small handful of people. If you're a Mexican drug cartel, you're making out like a bandit, which of course you are. But along the way, there are lots of victims. By some counts, it's 30%, by others, it's closer to 60% of the women and the children who were brought up through these caravans, prompted and invited by President Biden and Secretary of Minorities, who were sexually assaulted along the way. This is human sex trafficking. And so we've got to get a hold of our asylum policies, have border enforcement officials who actually has to enforce the law, rather than closing down ICE detention facilities, which are necessary to secure our border.
Thank you. All right. Okay, Mrs. Edwards, if Republicans take back the House and Senate, do you support the funding and completion of the wall? Why or why not? And then what should a strong border policy look like in your view?
Thank you. I've been disappointed to see that during those 2 years when Republicans controlled the presidency and both houses of Congress, we saw, in effect, very, very little work on this issue. Again, Congress not doing their job. What I'd like to see is a safe and secure border. So absolutely, I will listen to all of the experts here. If that means finishing the wall, we absolutely will invest in that and we will do it. In addition to whatever it takes to have those safe and secure borders. As I mentioned before, maintaining the human dignity of people going through the process and creating an expedited path for legal immigration, including supports around additional immigration judges, frontline visa workers across this nation who can actually do the work to do the very thing that we know we want. Listen, none of us want to see fentanyl and crime running rampant in our small towns across this state, but guess what? It is. It's happening right here. And it's in no small part because of Congress being ineffective at doing their job. I do hold them accountable for this, and I think you should too. What we know is that there is crime, there is human trafficking, there is a drug cartel. All of that is absolutely true. In addition to having the safety and security for people coming through the process legally, as I've just mentioned, and a significant effort to support those processes where they need to be. We also need to support diplomatic efforts with our adjacent countries south of the border to encourage democratic institutions there so that we don't have as much incentive for people to leave and flee countries where they're not safe. So that is something that has to be paired with our other efforts around immigration.
Thank you. Mrs. Isom, Republicans take back the House and Senate. Do you support funding and completion of construction on the wall? Why or why not? And what should a strong border policy look like in your view?
I will never forget the image of a mother, desperate, dropping a small infant over the wall. I cannot imagine being so desperate for a different life and a better way. I cannot imagine walking through the desert, not knowing where you're going or where you'll end up and what will be there when you arrive. My heart is with these folks that are looking for a better way. We have to address what's bringing them here in the first place and support democracy around the world in meaningful ways, not just with lip service. But we need to help those governments that will allow us to help them get people back, keep people home, give them stability. There's something here. They're coming here because we have something very special here. And I fear we take it for granted too often. And I see this in my home every day as our Ukrainian family calls home, not just to check on folks and see how their day is, but to make sure they're still breathing. They do not take freedom for granted. We cannot take freedom for granted. Protecting our border has to be a border, the entire border of our country. We have to examine our policies. I will support legislation to finish a wall, but I've had toddlers. A wall's not going to be enough. You have to have surveillance. You have to have monitoring. You have to have personnel. And that means you have to have a prioritization of funding and an actual plan. And that is where Congress is failing us. They are failing us day after day after day. And I am so tired of career politicians who point fingers at each other and never solve the problem. They need to sit down and do the hard work and the heavy lifting and make it happen.
Thank you. All right, Mrs. Edwards, you'll lead us out on this one. After the tragic shooting in Texas this past week, gun control and gun reform has already been a hot topic. The Utah Republican platform states to support the individual constitutionality, protected rights of the people to keep and bear arms for security and defense of their self, family, others' property, or the state, as well for other lawful purposes. We encourage personal responsibility for the care and use of these firearms. Do you believe that banning certain weapons will stop events like this from happening in the future? And what can we do to protect our children in schools while maintaining our right to bear arms?
Like many of you, my heart has been broken over the past week, not just for the people of Texas and those families and those children, but for all of the people who have been murdered senselessly through mass shootings going back years and years and even decades. That very day, I was sitting at my kindergarten granddaughter's kindergarten graduation. A group of the students in their little kindergarten-sized caps and gowns singing about the days of the week and having the time of their life filled with optimism and the future of what a bright summer and then first grade in the fall would mean for them. After that event, I went to my car, turned on my phone, and saw what had just been happening at that very time in Texas. Those children who will never see another day of the week, those are top of my mind. It's important to note how strongly I support the Second Amendment. For 5 times, I took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, including the Second Amendment when I served in the Utah House. I have a concealed carry permit. I supported and voted for constitutional carry. This is something I take very seriously. At the same time, I also know that it is possible to support Second Amendment and have conversations around firearm safety. We do not have to choose one or the other. It is not that type of decision. We can have productive, thoughtful, meaningful conversations with our elected officials in the federal level and in the state around how we have addressed this very, very important issue. I'm encouraged by some of the things I'm seeing right now, conversations around expanded background checks, mental health efforts that we've seen so well supported here in the state. We know that 84% of firearm deaths in the state of Utah are personally inflicted suicide. The efforts that we have made as a state around suicide prevention, many of which I co-sponsored when I served in the Utah House, help with those efforts. We can. These are not mutually exclusive. Let's bring responsible gun owners together with people who want to see action on firearm safety. We can do it. It takes political will, and I'm willing to have those hard conversations.
Thank you. Why now? So you went a little bit over, so we're going to take 15 seconds off of your next round, just so you know. Okay, on to Mrs. Isom. Okay, do you believe that banning certain weapons will stop events like this from happening in the future? What can we do to protect our children in schools while maintaining our right to bear arms?
Mr. Isom appreciates when you clarify there. 32 years is a long time. A good long time. I mean, in a good way. My heart is with those families in Uvalde. I cannot imagine. We're talking about 22 funerals for babies, for teachers, and even the shooter. Families that are planning the worst scenario ever. No parent is the same after burying a child. I know. The gravity of this situation, the tragedy of this situation, is not lost on me. We owe it to them, to the victims, to their families, to get this right. We owe it to them to not become numb. We owe it to them to work together, and the answers aren't easy. Some can be immediate, and some are systemic. What do we know? We know that a family broke down. We know that a young man felt despair and hopelessness, and his violent tendencies were unaddressed. We know that when he wounded his own grandmother, law enforcement didn't pursue him fast enough. We know there were breakdowns in process. We know that children were making repeated 911 calls that went unanswered. We have to figure out why. I wish the answer were as simple as some people are proposing it might be, but it's not. It's systemic. We have to take a good hard look at mental health. Families need a portal into services, and I appreciate our crisis response teams locally. I appreciate the Huntsmans for the work that they're doing, but there's so much more that needs to be done to prevent this kind of tragedy. We also need to do more when it comes to examining our guns, because I'm going to go over time here, and I know that. Responsible gun owners are not at fault in this scenario. Responsible gun owners want to keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. Responsible gun owners support expanded background checks and are willing to have meaningful dialogue about red flag laws, but show me one that works. Show me one that would have prevented what happened. Let's have those conversations.
Thank you. Okay, that's 25 seconds. We'll take off on the next one. So, Mr. Lee, do you believe that banning certain weapons will stop events like this from happening in the future? What can we do to protect our children in schools while maintaining the right to bear arms?
My heart truly breaks. Imagine the unspeakable horrors that those families experience, and you can't imagine what they've gone through every day since then. There is a long-term view and a nearer-term view that we've got to have on this. In the longer-term view, I think we have to develop an understanding of what's leading to the social isolation and despair, particularly in the young men who perpetrate these kinds of offenses. What's bringing them to that point? We've seen a fraying of some of our fundamental institutions of society, a fraying of people's confidence in families and in faith in schools and in community associations. In the near term, we need to look through a few things. We've got laws. I think all Americans agree. We've got a system of laws in place. We identify certain people who should never have guns. Convicted felons, those who have been convicted of a domestic violence offense, and so forth. Some still get there. Another thing that we need to look to in the shorter term is what happens with social media. Get these people marinating in violent entertainment their whole lives. And a lot of them, before they engage in violent acts, will go onto social media and they'll make posts expressing admiration for mass killers. Make posts expressing some type of aspiration to engage in mass killings. Make posts, in some cases, even providing detailed plans for the horrific events that they want to carry out. Look, social media companies, I don't know how they do this, but they somehow know what kind of toothbrush I'm going to buy, when I'm going to buy it, before I even give it any thought. They can do that. They can tell us who's about to do one of these things. I think they need to figure out how to figure out who's going to do this, and then report it to authorities. And if they won't do it on their own, we will make them. I'm going to go over on this one just a bit. Look, as we look at the laws that identify prohibited persons, if there are gaps in those laws, I'm open to considering fixing those gaps. In the meantime, we do have to have this conversation about why it's happening. And I think it's a whole lot more about our social fabric. Looking to one weapon of choice isn't going to fix it.
Thank you. We're going to remove 25 off of the next one too, just so we know. Okay. So, Mrs. Isom, you just look so good. You know, it's just... Okay. Roe v. Wade. With the leaked release of the Supreme Court opinion, Roe v. Wade was once again brought to the forefront of national politics. With the Supreme Court getting ready to issue the opinion on the Mississippi abortion case and the recent vote taken in the Senate, would you support federal legislation creating the same right to abortion as Roe v. Wade? Minus 25. Just so you know, Ms. Isom, you're up first.
Okay. I'm a mother of 4 and a grandmother of 5. My 3rd pregnancy, I gave birth to a 1 pound 5 ounce preemie. I'd been sent home at 7 weeks and 9 weeks to miscarry. And to me, that was a baby, and I fought to keep him alive. He's now a 25-year-old college graduate, and I see the potential in every human. I care about life. I'm for life. And this is a very complex situation, a very complex subject for me. and for every woman, which is exactly why we need women in the U.S. Senate weighing in on this decision that affects us every day. Yes. And women matter. We bring something to the table that's unique. I'm not just for life, I'm for consent. I'm against violence. I'm for family planning. And for improvements in the way we talk about sexual education with our children. We've got to do all we can to prevent unwanted pregnancy in the first place.
Thank you. And we'll go to Mr. Lee, who's missing 25 seconds as well.
I'm emphatically and apologetically pro-life. We're talking here not about undifferentiated cells. We're talking about babies. We should support them. It's one of the most important functions of government, is to protect life, liberty, and property, chiefly life. 49 years ago, the Supreme Court of the United States arrogated to itself authority that it did not have and lacks to this day. The authority to tell governments everywhere, state, federal, and local, that they may not protect babies if they're in the womb. This was wrong, not just morally, but it is fundamentally wrong constitutionally. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives this power to federal judges, nothing in the Constitution that prohibits governments from protecting unborn human life. There's nothing in the Constitution that makes this, and I would add most issues, necessarily a federal issue as opposed to a state one. So if the Supreme Court is in fact on the verge of overturning that unfortunate and very wrong precedent, I applaud it. And no, I would never, ever support legislation extending the false claims of Roe versus Wade to the country through statute.
All right, Mrs. Edwards, you're only minus 15 seconds. With the Supreme Court ready to issue an opinion on the Mississippi abortion case and the recent vote taken in the Senate, would you support federal legislation creating the same right to abortion as Roe v. Wade?
Thank you. Of course, like everyone else here in this room, I was incredibly disappointed with the leak. The politicization of this foundational entity, the Supreme Court that should be above this kind of action, was very, very problematic. And of course, I believe in the sanctity of life. As a woman of faith, that is deeply embedded in my belief system. Let me also share, as a trauma social worker sitting in the emergency room with women who have experienced trauma, abuse, pregnancy loss through miscarriage or IVF loss, I've been in those rooms where those women have been having those heartbreaking, heart-wrenching conversations with their faith leaders, their family members, and their medical professionals, and considering their care. It's for women like that, and so many other young girls who have experienced rape, women with disabilities who have experienced being taken advantage of for their entire lives on repeat. It's for those individual circumstances that my heart goes out, and I understand that we have to have conversations that are thoughtful, productive, and meaningful on this issue. I have long felt that because of those women and the unique circumstances, that at this time I have not seen a need to revisit Roe v. Wade. I've not seen a compelling reason to do that. And it is for that reason that I support states if this is overturned. I support states in their efforts to support women's health, including mental health, across the spectrum of a woman's life. Support children in their life and prevention around birth control and family planning. All of those are part of this conversation, but we have to be thoughtful, we have to be nuanced, and we can protect life and also take into consideration these heartbreaking, rocky road situations that face so many women in our lives and in our communities.
Okay, we are on to the last question in here. We're running up on our 90-minute debate time, which was set. Mr. Lee, you'll answer this one first. In 2021, the U.S. had a $355 billion trade deficit to China. The United States imported about 8.47 million barrels per day. Many Utahns ascribe to an America First agenda. What does America first mean to you? And would you say that we should always put American interests above all others?
Yes, of course. We are the United States of America. U.S. representatives, U.S. senators, U.S. presidents should always be looking out first and foremost for the needs of our country, of our people. Not that others aren't deserving, it's that that's our job to do. We're supposed to look out for Americans first and foremost. Now, very often, things that are good for us will also be good for other people. That's why I support efforts to make sure that we have trade without undue interference with the federal government, and make sure that we have a regulatory system that promotes rather than discourages this. But yeah, this is a real problem. When we look at the fact that we went from being an energy producer, an energy exporter, to a country that now has a president going to dangerous foreign leaders, cap in hand, asking them for more oil, you have to ask the question, why? Whose interests are they promoting? Whose interests are they protecting? Are they really that concerned about going along with some international protocol negotiated in Paris or Kyoto or somewhere else that they're willing to stick it to people at the pump in Peoria and Provo? I don't think that's a good idea. So yes, America should be first. The way to put America first is to follow the Constitution. If you follow the Constitution, you'll make America first, because that's how it works in this country.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mrs. Edwards, in 2021, the U.S. I won't read that whole part, sorry. What does the America first mean to you, and would you say that we should always put American interest above all others?
You know, when I think about what this issue means, really boots on the ground across the state of Utah, I think about the dozens and dozens of people I've spoken with who are in our tech community. You know, this issue we think about only impacts our energy sector, and it's not just that, it's innovation, it's entrepreneurship. It is people across this state who are growing jobs here in Utah, here in our country, and are impacting our communities. It's people in the biotech and life science industry, and it is other people who are really using the innovative spirit that we depend on so much to have grown our economy, and is helping people attract, it's helping Utah attract and retain employees and companies to come into this country and to our state. In addition to those issues, and I think about those communities, we also have to have a robust effort around our energy sector as well. We need to have fair practices with tariffs. We need to have a level playing field. So when we're competing against our partners and allies, and even our adversaries, that we can cooperate where we can, compete when we are able, and that we need to have a level playing field so we can bring robust jobs to this state, to this country, and support innovative entrepreneurship. That is the lifeblood of this state.
Thank you. Ms. Isom. Mrs. Isom. What does America first mean to you? What would you say that we should always put American interests above all others?
As Utah's next senator, I will absolutely put America first. Not just in word, but also in deed. The pandemic that we just all withstood revealed a lot of vulnerabilities for our country. Vulnerabilities in supply chain, vulnerabilities in our energy, vulnerabilities in our economy. I said earlier, I fear we've squandered our prosperity. It's really time to get our house in order, to make the hard decisions, to have the courage to say the things that need to be said and do the things that need to be done, which is why I committed to serve 2 terms and come home. Because career politicians will say one thing in an election year and do something very different in Washington, D.C. We need leadership, not more politicians. We need people who understand the United States Constitution is the framework for freedom in this country. People who prioritize manufacturing. I'd like to see it reshored, and I would do all I can to support American manufacturing. The other thing we need to do is bring biotech and all of its inputs back to the country. We're incredibly vulnerable on that front especially, and I've seen it on the front lines as a tech executive in biotech and nanotech. It is not acceptable for us to have to get our supplies from other nations, to be so vulnerable. We also need to stop making deals with the bad guys, as we've talked about when it comes to oil and our need for energy supplies. But if we actually mean put America first, then we have to cut back on regulation. And in the Herbert administration, it's one of the very first things we did in this state. As I worked for it as a senior leader in the Herbert team, as his deputy chief of staff and communications director, we have prioritized regulation cutbacks. We reduced more than 400 regulations, or eliminated more than 400 regulations in this state. The federal government needs to do the very same thing, and it's up to our elected officials to hold them accountable, to make sure that those leaders feel responsible to reduce regulation, because regulation stifles innovation and investment and hurts America.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the conclusion of our debate this evening. And so closing statements, once again, were drawn in a random order. We will lead off with Mrs. Edwards, Mrs. Isom, and then our Mr. Lee. Let us remind you that these final statements are limited to 2 minutes, and you are allowed to clap after these final statements. So let's start with Mrs. Edwards.
You know, it's not lost on me that we're meeting in a junior high auditorium. These issues that we're talking about, things like water, public lands, inflation, immigration, guns, these are things that impact us, absolutely. But you know who we really are thinking about tonight? It's the kids who are going to be sitting here next fall, who are going to show up in this very auditorium, day one, ready for a new school year. It's for the future of this state that we are having this discussion. It's why you're here, it's why I'm here. And at the end of the day, this election is so much more than the answers that we've given in the past 90 minutes. It's in a pattern of effective leadership on your behalf and on behalf of the future of this state. What I've seen as I've been around this state talking to farmers, ranchers, students in many cases, people in the tech community, everyday Utahns, is people are tired. They're tired of elected officials who do not represent them, do not get things done. I've heard from so many people who say, it's not enough to say no. I want to know what comes next. What's next after no? What is your solution and what is your ability to get something done? Can you bring people together for solutions? Can you align people with your vision? And over, with all due respect to our good Senator Lee, I am seeing a lack on that front, and it is not okay. I know that things can be better. For 10 years, I served in the Utah House in a way that did this very thing we need more of. Bringing people together, working for actual solutions, doing the long-term hard work of working for the people of this country. Why I'm in this race is to bring productive, proactive, and inclusive leadership on behalf of the state of Utah and the United States Senate. Thank you for your attention tonight, and I would appreciate your vote.
Mrs. Isom, your closing remarks, please.
It's time for a different kind of leadership. Not the kind that uses fear to keep us where we are, the kind that gives us hope for what we can be. Politicians forget that they affect us every day. The real world is choosing between filling your gas tank and paying your gas bill. I know because I've been working in the real world since I was about 8 years old, and not so we could go to Disneyland, so we could afford milk and make rent. Some of those things that I did weren't glamorous, like cleaning a movie theater or cafeteria, but most of it really mattered. It mattered to my 4 kids and my 5 grandkids, to Utah school children, to Utah seniors and LGBTQ people. It mattered to Utah's water and land. I've worked really hard on some of Utah's thorniest challenges to produce real results with our top leaders in government, religion, business, and tech. We all know the Utah way. It's working together. It's building relationships and trust. It's not voting against your state every week for 12 years. Let me tell you what I'm for. I am for Hill Air Force Base and veterans. I am for Utah Utah businesses, we're hardworking families. I am for energy. I am for hardening the grid. I am for a balanced budget amendment, and I'm for term limits for real. I am for Utah. I'm a classic Utah Reagan conservative. I might be a bit of a policy nerd. I'm a business and community leader, and I believe in America, in freedom and free enterprise. Utah, she's a different kind of leader. Let's get this country back on track. I'm Isom, and together, we're going to get the right things done. Thank you for your time tonight. I'd appreciate your support and vote. God bless this state and this nation, our United States of America.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, would you close us out, please?
My daughter Eliza, a baby, one of my favorite Utahns, is getting married in about a month. And my family means the world to me. It's the most important thing to me, as I'm sure it is to all of us. And marriage is an opportunity to reflect on the blessings that we enjoy today and on the blessings of the future. These are important things to reflect on in any moment. As Republicans, we think about them a lot, because we enjoy our way of life. We enjoy the freedom to live and do as we choose, and find happiness in the blessings of freedom. The Constitution protects those freedoms. That's why I stand up for it. The Republican Party is the party of the Constitution. We have right now a President Joe Biden, who doesn't share our view of good government, doesn't share our view of freedom or good policy. We face all sorts of threats as a result of it. We have a government that's collecting data on parents simply because they disagree with what their children are being taught in public schools. We have a president who's making everything from gas to groceries more expensive. And he wants to pile on more and more federal regulations. What we need in this moment is to make sure that we bring back a Republican majority in the United States Senate this fall. I want to make sure that Utah does its part. This is, after all, a Republican primary. Let's make sure that in November, we send a Republican to the United States Senate to serve the country. I always want to make sure that we help those in need. I love it when Utahns call for help. I help them as best I can each and every time. I'm grateful, profoundly grateful, for the opportunity given me to be your U.S. Senator. I thank God above for it every day. I'm asking humbly for your vote, and I appreciate you being here. May God bless the great state of Utah and the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. You've been a great audience tonight. Thank you for being supportive of your candidates. This is, once again, a Republican primary. We hope that all of you will support our Republican nominee, no matter whom it is. And we hope that this coming November, that we will continue to keep Utah red, and that we will continue to send a Republican to the United States Senate. Thank you all for coming.